The Dodgers are in an uproar as their GM signs Ben Rotbett to a 2-year contract and holds an introductory press conference. Rushing moves to the weakest team in history, his final words cause a stir. Rotbett reveals his reason for returning. "I wanted to catch Shohei's pitches." It happened in the middle of an otherwise quiet afternoon. The Dodgers front office, without warning, announced a 2-year contract for catcher Ben Rotbett. No rumors, no leaks, no insider reports building up to it, just a sudden press release, and then a press conference an hour later. For a front office that usually plans these things months in advance, this is almost unheard of. What did you make of the timing of this signing? Honestly, the timing is the strangest part of the whole story. The Dodgers don't move like this. Every major signing this front office has made in the last several years has been preceded by weeks of speculation, planted stories, agent leaks, the whole machine. This time, there was nothing. That tells me one of two things. Either this deal came together so fast that there wasn't time for the usual process, or it was deliberately kept quiet because someone didn't want it debated in public before it was finalized. And when you look at who Rotbett is, I lean toward the second explanation. Rotbett isn't a marquee name. He's a journeyman catcher, primarily known for his game calling and his defense behind the plate rather than his bat. Some analysts even called him a non-tender candidate this winter. So why would a team with championship aspirations rush to lock him up before anyone else could even bid? That's the question everyone in the clubhouse is reportedly asking right now. That's exactly the part that doesn't add up on the surface. If you just look at the stat line, Rotbett isn't the kind of player who normally generates a press conference. His batting average has hovered in the .220s for 2 straight seasons. His OPS is below league average for the position. If you're judging this purely as a baseball transaction, it looks questionable at best. But the Dodgers don't make decisions in a vacuum, and that's where it gets interesting. At the press conference, reporters pushed Rotbett hard on why he chose the Dodgers, especially with at least 2 other teams reportedly offering more guaranteed money. He could have ducked the question. Instead, he gave an answer nobody expected. "I wanted to catch Shohei's pitches." The room reportedly went silent for a second before the follow-up questions came flooding in. That single sentence is doing a lot of work. On the surface, it sounds almost sentimental, a veteran catcher wanting to share a battery with one of the most dominant pitchers in the sport. But I think there's something more calculated underneath it. Catching Ohtani isn't a simple assignment. His sweeper breaks late and sharp, his fastball sits in the high 90s and touches triple digits, and he mixes locations in a way that punishes a catcher who can't frame and call a game at an elite level. If Rotbett is saying he specifically wants that challenge, he's telling the front office something about his own confidence behind the plate that the numbers don't show. There's also a quieter signal in that quote. Ohtani has had stretches this season where his control wavered early in outings. We saw it just last week, wide balls and high pitches in the first 2 innings before he settled in. A catcher who can manage that kind of volatility, who can call the right sequence even when the stuff isn't locating perfectly, is worth more to a coaching staff than his batting average suggests. I think the Dodgers front office sees Rotbett as a stabilizing presence specifically for Ohtani's starts, not as an everyday bat. So this wasn't really about adding offense. This was about protecting their most valuable asset. That's how I'd frame it. And once you see it that way, the urgency of this signing makes a lot more sense. If the front office identified Rotbett as the right defensive fit for Ohtani specifically, then every day he stays on the open market is a day a rival team could scoop him up first, even a team with no real need for him, purely to spite the Dodgers or to auction the price up. Moving fast and quiet removes that risk entirely. But here's where the public reaction gets harsh, and it's worth addressing directly. A lot of fans are calling this the weakest roster move of the offseason, pointing out that the team still has glaring holes in the bullpen and at third base, and instead of addressing either, the front office spent assets and a roster spot on a backup caliber catcher. Is that criticism fair? I understand where it's coming from, and I won't pretend the optics are good. If you're a fan watching the bullpen ERA from last season and waiting for reinforcements, seeing your team's first real move of the winter go toward a .220 hitting catcher is going to feel like a letdown. That frustration is legitimate. But I'd push back on the idea that this signing and bullpen help are mutually exclusive. Teams don't spend their entire budget in one transaction. This looks like a low-cost, high-specificity move designed to solve one very particular problem, and it likely doesn't touch the budget set aside for bullpen or infield additions later this winter. What concerns me more than the money is the message it sends to the rest of the roster. When you fast-track a role player into a press conference like this, you're elevating his importance in a way that can create tension in the clubhouse, especially with other catchers already on the roster who may now see their playing time shrink. How does a front office manage that kind of internal pressure? That's the part that will actually determine whether this move is judged a success or a disaster, and it has very little to do with stats. If the incumbent catchers buy into the idea that Rotbett's role is narrowly defined, primarily catching Ohtani starts and a handful of others, then this can work smoothly as a specialized arrangement, similar to how some teams use a personal catcher for a knuckleball pitcher. But if it's handled poorly, if Rotbett starts creeping into more games than expected, you risk alienating players who have earned their spot through performance. The front office needs to communicate this internally with total clarity, and honestly, the public quote about catching Ohtani may have been as much a message to the clubhouse as it was an answer to reporters. Let's talk about Rotbett himself for a moment. Walking into a clubhouse this talented, on a team this scrutinized, after a rush signing that's already drawing criticism, that's not an easy spot for any player, let alone one without star-level numbers to fall back on. What does this say about him as a competitor? It says he's not afraid of pressure, and honestly, that might be the most important quality for this specific job. Catching for Ohtani means every pitch, every sequence, every mound visit is going to be under a microscope. A catcher who's anxious about scrutiny will struggle in that role no matter how good his framing numbers are. Choosing to walk directly into that situation, knowing his own offensive numbers would be picked apart the moment he signed, tells me Rotbett has a level of self-belief that the stat sheet doesn't capture. The same way Ohtani's value isn't fully explained by ERA alone, I don't think Rotbett's value will be fully explained by batting average either. So where does this leave the Dodgers heading into the rest of the offseason? Does this signing actually solve anything, or does it just shift the conversation? I think it accomplishes something narrow but real. It removes uncertainty around who catches Ohtani starts for the next 2 years, and it does so with a player who specifically wanted that assignment rather than one assigned to it reluctantly. That stability has value, even if it doesn't show up in a box score. The bigger holes, bullpen depth, third base, are still very much open questions, and how the front office addresses those in the coming weeks will say a lot more about whether this is a smart, sequenced off-season or a disorganized one. But taken on its own, this wasn't a panic move. It was a quiet, deliberate decision to protect their most important pitcher, wrapped in a press conference that, for one sentence at least, made the whole thing make sense. What did you think of that final answer? I wanted to catch Shohei's pitches. Let us know in the comments, and stay tuned as we continue tracking the Dodgers' off-season moves.